What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we return with Cliff of the almighty Dry Kill Logic. Great to have you back on. Thanks for joining me again, man.
What up, fella? Nice to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to be able to talk with you, especially because when I spoke to you in 2020, it's interesting on how that was because I think like when I spoke to you in 2020, it was like March or April. So I think that there was some like wheels spinning of Dry Kill Logic, coming back and, giving us all that, but certain things in 2020 kind of made that a little bit difficult. I know there were some issues in music happening at that time. But so where we are right now, it's so great to be able to see you guys are killing it. I'm finally going to pop the Dry Kill cherry at the Brooklyn show, and I can't wait for that. Just so are you kind of like, is this picking up where you left off? Are we seeing from Dry Kill Logic what the intention was for 2020? Or are we kind of like back to the drawing board with Dry Kill Logic in terms of new music, touring again, and etc.?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter. When we released the singles in 2019 and 2020, we had gotten together again to start writing in 2016, 2017, and that produced, Vices and Don't See Ghosts and the framework for what would eventually become Now You Belong with the Dead. I don't think at that point we really were prepared to enter back into the live space and, start to get back at it, so to speak. We just always enjoyed each other's company. We've always been very close. And listen, we like writing music together. So the action of creating music is very natural for us when we're together. And I think these songs were like just a really great representation of that. Now, with everything, kind of happening in 2025 with regards to these larger festival performances, to these headline shows, to another new song, I think this now begins what I would consider whatever comes next, the next chapter, the next evolution. But, we do hope that there's more of everything, music, shows, getting to see friends again that we haven't seen in so long. So, just keep the good times rolling.
That's exactly what, keep the good times rolling is the only formula you need. And I definitely asked this the last time I spoke to you, but like with the singles that we hear now and new music now that you belong with Dead and all this, do you feel like this is continuing where you left off after A Vengeance at Violence in terms of a musical direction? Does this feel like, you're picking up where you left off, kind of reaching on a similar bookshelf, or, first album and almost 20 years, this is like new uncharted territory for Dry Kill Logic? It's almost feeling like you're a different musician entirely.
Sure. It's a great question, right? When we got together and we started writing these songs, I think, we were just evolved. We hadn't really recorded anything together in 10 years at that point. So we were like, an old computer, an old laptop that you left in a drawer somewhere, that the initial action was just like, does this thing even turn on anymore? Do the screens work? Did all the buttons still, anything missing? So now I think the exercise is, we've worked through kind of the initial reconditioning, if you will, of that songwriting muscle. And now as we think about moving forward, we're probably in a better place to embrace the possibilities of what can be. Back then, I think we were just trying to see what could be. And to be honest, we love those songs. It's, we're really happy to play some of them at these upcoming headline shows. We're really stoked to kind of just introduce that music at scale to folks. Again, these are songs that have never been played live anywhere. So it'll be just as new for everybody else as it is for us,
So, we've all heard this at one point in our life, it's like riding a bike. You never forget and whatever. But is making new music and writing and, especially because, we're never the same people in 20 years. We always grow and we always develop. So would you say as a songwriter, is it really like riding a bike, if you will? Or do you feel like it's almost like relearning this art that you have? I mean, these singles are just as amazing as anything I would have heard off of The Dead and Dreaming and etc. But I am wondering if, is it still dry? Is it really still Dry Kill Logic, if that makes sense?
No, and I think that, you're on to something. For us, we take the act of songwriting very seriously. We just enjoy each other's company. We stand in service of the song. We're never going to write something and be like, because the thought we always have, even if we don't, is imagine if you had to go out on stage and play this thing live. And if you're not sold on the chorus, or the bridge is like, nah, I don't know, I don't really like it, then it's never going to work. So we always together as a group, are constantly kind of poking and pulling and like, is this right? Is this good? Are we doing this? So we really work quite hard to make sure that the music has the same level of, I don't want to say intensity or craftsmanship, and none of those subjective words. I think that we just want to maintain the integrity we've always maintained when it comes to songwriting. As long as we love it, we're comfortable releasing it. The fans will be the ultimate arbiter of the music, but we take the act of songwriting very seriously. I think that part, we're all more comfortable with. If we had to reintroduce ourselves to anything after 20 years, it's the idea of playing live. I have always had, but perhaps now more than ever, have a profound level of respect for touring musicians, people that do this full time. I mean, you work muscles that no gym could ever give you a stimulus on.
Especially as a vocalist.
Yeah, I mean, and then the idea of, high intensity impact training, right? It's like, yeah, we'll go run around in a, 40-foot square for 50 minutes while screaming. That's about as hit as it gets. So all of this, I think, for me as a singer, is really just kind of relearning the things that we're further away from, which are the live shows, and really trying to double down on the stuff that we're really interested in right now, which is the songwriting, the act of creating something that you really enjoy. And thank you for the kind words on the singles. I guess it means that we're headed in the right direction. So knock on wood.
Well, definitely. I mean, because, one thing so we listen to Dry Kill Logic at my shop all the time. Again, shout out to Brick, my mentor, and one of my mentors. And I've heard Lost played at the shop. I've heard Nightmare played at the shop. I heard Feel the Break. I've heard Paper Tiger. I've heard the new singles. I've heard everything. And I've asked it countless times, because even though I listen to Dry Kill Logic, can't remember the whole discography by heart. So I've asked, oh, who is this? And multiple times I'm told, oh, it's Dry Kill Logic. I'm like, oh, it's the same band, and it has many different aspects behind it. So is what we're hearing right now from Dry Kill Logic, in terms of the new music, is this representative of who Cliff and the rest of the band are at this time? Is this a reflection of, this is who we are now, this is where we are at the moment? Or is this maybe like a recap or a retrospective or a summary of what you've experienced in the last 20 years? Or maybe are you kind of like maybe going into it with the same headspace as you did in 2006?
I think ultimately this is a representation of who we are today. The tone of my voice is how I sing today. The riffs that we write and the structures that we create are, indicative of how we think about music today. Who knows how we'll think about it tomorrow, right? I mean, that's the beauty of art, is that you can continue to create and continue to evolve. But again, we know who we are. We're comfortable with the legacy of the band and the expectation of the audience. So, if you look at our albums, we've always run the gamut of songwriting, whether it was a song as heavy as Pain or Nightmare, and something as acoustic and melodic as Goodnight. And we've run that gamut on every record. So the idea of having moments that flex between these different emotions, we're fine with that. We actually, enjoy that kind of diversity and approach. And again, everything just stands in service of the song. As long as we feel really good about it and we feel confident, we believe that the audience that enjoys Dry Kill will also then enjoy it. And that's kind of as much thought as we put into it. I don't think, you could go down the rabbit hole of this or that, but in the end, it's ultimately the audience's job to decide whether this is a reflection of the past or an indication of the future. Does that excite you? Does that scare you? If so, why? If not, why not? Again, and this is all conversation that we love hearing. I love people who have informed opinions about our music over the eras that we've released it. I think it's wonderful. You probably are more informed than I am. So I just enjoy the reflection. The fact that this music means that much to people, that they have formed such opinions over time, that we're just very grateful for that.
Is your evolution as an artist, is that dictated? Do you control that? Or does evolution happen at an organic level where you can't even really realize it's happening until maybe you look back?
I mean, you can shout to the universe everything you want to be as you go along in this life, but it's only after you've lived a certain amount of years that you can look back and listen to what the universe has to tell you about your time.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully, as you were shouting out to the universe, telling it all about yourself and the things you like, you left some positive impact along the way. So when you finally stop and turn back around to see what is behind you, you feel confident and comfortable with your own legacy. And that's not something you always can see in the moment.
Do you think, and speaking of which, this is kind of like a question, a newer question that I've been asking people. Every year I have like a regular question that I include in every interview. Now, one of the biggest, like I would say, lies that I've experienced as a lover of music and, metal being in my blood is, when I hear people say, I'm the same teenager I was listening to Kiss records in my bedroom when I was 15, I think that I kind of have to call BS in the sense that we always love this music. But we grow, we outgrow certain things, our opinions change, our perceptions change. There's bands I loved back when I was a kid that I can't stand now, and then there's bands that I couldn't stand as a kid that I adore now. So we always grow and change our opinions. So has it been hard? But at the same time, when I listen to these new singles, it has all the charm that I've loved about Dry Kill Logic in the years. So has the adulting, that's inevitable no matter how much you try to fight it, and as we get older, has it been hard as an artist to kind of surrender a little bit of the kid in you, kill the darlings in a way, while maintaining Dry Kill Logic, but also growing as a man?
Sure. There's a great quote from Muhammad Ali, and it says, if the man at 20 is the same as the man at 50, then the man at 50 has wasted 30 years of his life.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that you just kind of had, I probably did a terrible job of paraphrasing it, but you know the point. I think it's the idea that in some ways you happen to change, you grow, you evolve, you take on new perspectives, you have new thoughts on things, you look at the world through a different set of eyes, and then some change happens to you. You get older, your voice changes in its tone, you're not in the back of a van sleeping 3 hours a night, smoking 25 joints a day. Like, some things just shift, and those things are out of your control. But some things are in your control. And at the end of it, you are just a collection of both of those. So now, as I start to think about how would I like to be expressed as the person that I am today, when I think about my lyrics, what type of message would I like to have? I know when I was 25 and 26, I was driven from a place of, at times, blind aggression when it came to songwriting. I had a very clear perspective and I wanted to exercise that in the shortest amount of words possible. But now, as I start to think about my experiences and how I would like to express them, maybe it's just not the same approach. I've started to think about phrasing. I read more. I have a wider, view of how I, enjoy turn of phrase. So some things you can control and some things you just can't.
Yeah.
But again, I think at the core of this, you are standing in service of the song and you don't become too overindulgent or you don't cater to your own whims, and you know that the song needs to be found in favor by the audience that loves what you create, then you kind of understand the job at hand. And the fun is in the dynamics of building that. Listen, if we wanted to write some sort of 15-minute operatic thing, as long as it were awesome, we'd release it. I mean, as long as we enjoy it, as long as we think it's really good, and I don't think we have any plans to do that, unless the guys are writing something I'm unaware of.
It's just it's the only reason I ask is because, like, every artist we listen to, like, for instance, we love Seek and Destroy by Metallica. It's a classic. Can't speak for James Hetfield, how dare I do so, but, like, as a fellow human being, there is no denying that maybe those guys are probably playing that song at times in agony, knowing that I have to be the same, what were they, like 20 when they made that song, and by all means, so that's why I've always thought that, like, sometimes it's hard for an art. I feel like when you become big at a young age, it makes it more difficult to grow up. Imagine being like Guns N' Roses and your entire life is enslaved to Appetite for Destruction when you were young and stupid and in your 20s, you know?
Well,
I'm
there
sure they're not
is
complaining, but you know.
no, there is a primal, a volcanic creative process when you are in the throes of like everything being new, in the throes of discovery, when you're in those moments where you're like, I'm just really coming into my own with my instrument. I'm coming into my own with my showmanship. I'm really starting to learn who I am. There's a confidence in that you discover that, is kind of, that's what defines the firsts in everybody's life. You do something right for the first time, you start to see the reaction, your confidence starts to build. And that's the part, that confidence is, I think, what everybody gravitates towards in the music, in the live show. It's the artist confidence, and that confidence is generally best served in those early moments. Now, the more success you have, the more confidence you can have, and then the more your life goes on, and perhaps at times you could be overconfident, and that has its own set of circumstances, right? Or perhaps you could not be confident enough, and that has its own set of circumstances. But that confidence, is the goal, right? Maintain it. And sometimes you have to lay into it, and sometimes you have to step out of it. So, the greatest form of leadership is leadership by example. And if an artist can stand on stage and represent themselves in a way that they always feel comfortable and confident in, then they're truly leading, creatively by example. They're being who they want to be. They write the music they want to write. They feel comfortable about it, and you listen to it and you react to that. You enjoy that. So, when done right, music is incredibly powerful. We all know this, but there's something to it. There's something to those early years, I think, that allows for that confidence to really come through. Because everything is about the first.
And there was another question I needed to ask you, and I got a little tip from my friends who are opening for you at the Brooklyn show. Shout out to Jason Leckberg from I Kill Ya.
Nice.
But he informed me, I didn't know this about you, but you were basically the Monty Connor of Jägermeister back in the day, in sense. And I'm just wondering, because I've never really gotten to speak with, like, Jägermeister was always like a household name in metal back in the day. Everybody's heard of, like, like those brands. Everybody in metal has heard of Hot Topic. Everybody in metal has heard of Monster Energy Drink. Everybody in metal has heard of Jägermeister. From working in that brand and that sort of product and, working in that marketing sense and being the scout for it, has that maybe influenced you as a musician? In a way, because Des from Devil Driver being a manager, and you have artists who do their own merch design. So always the business side of artists. I've always wondered if that was a means of inspiration artistically.
If you look at my professional career since the band came off the road in 2006, I've held a variety of executive positions across a few different industries. I was a product manager at Motown Republic. I've worked in the spirits industry across a variety of different brands. And I think that when you have exposure to the entertainment industry at large, what you realize is that there's a lot of opportunity to have success working in culture, whether that's with musicians or with artists or with chefs or with fashion designers, right? And I think that if I've learned anything from operating in culture for the last, 20 years or so, it's that the emotional connection between an artist and their audience is second to none. And that's really, I think, for me, as we start to think about coming back into this, it's the most important part of everything, is just the perspective of seeing so many different audiences' emotional connections to their favorite artists and seeing how the artists reacted to those audiences has given me and shaped a perspective that, I'm very thankful for. So yeah, I would say that my career outside of music has definitely helped my perspective when I think about my own musical career.
Which is awesome. And because I remember I never got to go to a Mayhem Fest, but I was always remembering like how, I would see that logo and then followed by Machine Head at the Jaeger stage at Mayhem, or who headlined it in 2009. I believe it was Trivium headlining it. So like, it's cool to really just see that these brands have just as much connections to us or become just as much of a household name in a way as the bands themselves do.
The brands that do it right really do it right. And the greatest example that I give kind of across the board at a brand that really understands not only culture, but their role in it is Red Bull.
Okay.
You know, you start to think about, you're much younger than I am, but if you start to think about the Red Bull ads that came out 20 years ago, they were those stick figure drawings, and all you were told throughout this whole very strange experience was Red Bull gives you wings. And it wasn't until you were exposed to the brand at large that you got a better understanding of what that was. Fast forward 20 years, and now skydivers throw themselves out of satellites. And when you ask yourself why they do that, the answer is super clear. It's because Red Bull gives you wings. So the idea that you can breathe life into a brand's meaning by operating in the context of culture is very powerful.
Absolutely.
And I think that all brands look for those opportunities when they start to think about how to emulate similar emotional connections between their product and audience.
And some would argue that that's just the corporate businessman mentality. That's not artistic at all. I mean, if you can make a slogan or a brand that speaks to people or connects with people, Red Bull gives you wings. That's a genius line right there. I mean, if you can really create a tagline like that speaks to people and be professional, that's a artistic genius mind in and of itself.
Well, think about when you see your advertisement, and that's 15 seconds, and then you go to the store and you see a big display, and that's 5 seconds that you're looking around and you see it. But all the meaning is built in the middle, right? And the emphasis on Red Bull gives you wings when they define the meaning is about you. The Flugtag, the go-kart race, the skydiver, the jump boarder, all of those different sports are about you and what you're doing. So it's really an interesting proposition on how they approach value in culture. And again, I'm not trying to even have a conversation. I got off of work hours ago, so I don't want to have a conversation about marketing jargon. That's not the goal. But the idea is that there's really interesting ways to participate in culture. And it's always about the emotional connection between the artist and the audience. That's the most important part of music, and that's the part that should really be preserved.
Yeah, I mean, I think the modern day equivalent, like a band, because, you know, like when we always have, like, when we look at bands throughout the decades, right, we have kind of like an idea of what a group of band members in the 60s looked like or the 80s looks like, and there's always like those rock star, Spinal Tap stereotypes. Nowadays, it almost seems like musicians have to be almost entrepreneurial in their mind, in a sense.
Well, that's the great beauty of where the music industry is now. It's been completely democratized. You can have any career you choose to have. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but let's be honest, to have 20 years ago this level of half an hour long form conversation would have required a publicist, a true editorial outlet, a whole bunch of setup. For anyone to hear our song at scale, we would have had to be on the radio, which would have required a gatekeeper. To see our video or any sort of visuals, to see what we're about creatively, we would have had to be on MTV or Music Choice, which has another gatekeeper. And the list goes on and on and on and on and on, down to the individual store that has a buyer that has to determine whether you're good enough or not to be seen by that record buying audience. So the fact that that is gone, and that there can be a real-time conversation with your audience about everything, that's really powerful. And perhaps that's a part of the perspective that I find most fascinating after 20 years, is how few gatekeepers there are now. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that the walls haven't been bulldozed and everybody is running through. There's a lot out there to consume. So the job is yours now to figure out what to do with it, but you have everything you need.
With every evolution, there's always going to be a disadvantage and an advantage. There's no such thing as evolution without something getting screwed. I mean, that's just the aspects of life. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's great to say that I interviewed Dry Kill Logic on 2 occasions now. Just these new singles are out. I can't wait to see you guys finally perform. What else could we be expecting from Dry Kill Logic in the near future, if you are allowed to say at this very moment, of course?
No, sure. I mean, listen, 2025 is kind of mapped out and announced. We have these 2 shows next week, the 13th at the Brooklyn Monarch on Friday, and then on Saturday at Dingbats in New Jersey. And then in July, we've got Rockfest in Cadott, Wisconsin, and Incarceration in Mansfield, Ohio.
Oh, that's
We're going to take August and September. Enjoy the summer a little bit, continue to rehearse. We're going to wrap up 2025 live with Aftershock, our first time in California in 20 years. So really excited just to come back to these markets, see our old friends, see folks we haven't talked to in a generation, and just kind of spend some time in the places we haven't been and revisit that, live in that emotion. But, we'd like to come back and begin the writing process and get to a body of work that, hopefully in 2026 we're able to release in some capacity. That's the goal. So we'll see. We'll see how close we get.
I've been to both Incarceration and Aftershock. You are in for a hell of a good time at both of those festivals, man.
And we're just so grateful to be a part of it.
Yep.
Can't believe we're playing with these amazing bands.
It's been too long. Not to make you feel old, but like it's crazy to think that like people who are 18, legal adults, were born now when you guys broke up, or like when you guys stopped in 2006, just to put things into perspective.
No, it is really wonderful to just see new audiences, see the old, like just to see everybody, and to just to get to say hello again. You see numbers on Spotify, you have no idea what it means, but to get to see folks in person, I think that's just something we all find very special, and we're just excited to come back around again. We're not rushing. We'll take our time. We'll get everywhere. But we're just excited to see it.
You're coming back at the right time. Get on a reunion show, get Crossfade and Spine Shank and you guys on a tour, and then that's the reunion show of the year. So.
All right, well, you just put it out in the universe. Let's see what the universe has to say about it.
Let's make it happen. But everybody, we are here with Dry Kill Logic. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.